Good morning, everyone, or good evening or good afternoon, whichever might be applicable. To give you a few more words around what we do after Teemu's introduction, we come from trade compliance. Trade compliance have three components. There's legal control or export control, which is the most known, I think. There's customs and free trade, and there's sanctions. So export control, import control, which is legal control, is all about governing who gets access to what type of products where. Sanctions is restrictions that are put on entities, individuals, and companies in terms of what they are allowed to get and not, under which conditions. And customs is all about governing what comes in and what goes out from an individual country. That is trade compliance, and that is our frame of reference for everything we do when it comes to process mining and analytics. We started our analytical journey way back in 2016, and in 2016 we started out by redesigning our entire process. We realized that trade compliance from a process perspective is not a sequential set of activities, it's a number of discrete controls and activities that need to happen integrated in the business flow. The next realization was that we needed to actually map that business flow. So we looked at the data, where does it come from, where does it go? And that gave us the foundation to automate the process and have a new way of monitoring trade compliance in the business flow on a more or less permanent basis rather than individual snapshots at certain points. We are currently in the middle of the digital transformation of our operation. We are historically, like many other organizations, very manual, sequential and paper-based, which is, with the transaction volumes that Teemu was alluding to, getting rapidly impossible. Once that digital transformation has been completed, we will be more able to utilize modern tools like large language models and machine learning to not only define what we're looking for, but also find new things that we haven't even realized or we should be looking for. The next step then would be predictive trade compliance and preventive trade compliance, which would mean essentially understanding what might happen and making sure it doesn't if it shouldn't.
And to give you a glimpse of the number of data we are operating on up until today, I'll give you some statistics on that. So up to today, we have more than 1 terabyte of data. I think it's actually 1.2 as of today that we are processing our analytics on. And we are on every month adding around 10 to 20 million transactions that we're adding to the capacity of doing analytics every month. So we have been adding up quite some data that we're working on as of today.
So the role of process mining in trade compliance for us in Ericsson is maybe slightly different compared to what others have presented already today. We use it for continuous monitoring of the business flows, things that we can do with a machine, but we can't do it with humans, simply because it would require very many humans. We use it to identify issues and problems. We use it to notify of those problems, and we use it to analyze what's going on. So for single cases, we can filter out the single cases that we are, for various reasons, interested in. It might be a combination of product characteristic, destination country, and recipient that might raise a warning flag that we need to look at. We can see user behavior when people do things not necessarily from a bad perspective, but because of lack of knowledge, for instance. And they do things in the wrong sequence or in the wrong way so that it opens up for a potential problem. Interestingly enough, we have also found that we can monitor system performance because we have a very integrated and complex system landscape. And that system landscape depends on all the systems being in sync and the data propagating through the systems in an orderly manner, in a timely fashion. We can find out when that doesn't happen, and this tool that we built helps us do that. At the end of the day, the whole point is to mitigate any issues or problems that we may find. So those mitigations is also something that we are helped with when we can see the facts on the table and understand what people are doing, how they do it, and then we can find out why they do it and rectify it as required.
Okay, to build on that, we've heard earlier today in the presentations very many cases or explanations of process mining. And most of the time when you listen to process mining being explained, it's focusing on optimization, finding bottlenecks, finding SLAs, turnaround times, and so on and so forth. Basically, what you're doing is we're looking at the data, zooming out, and taking a look at the big picture. As you can understand, we are also interested in that from a primarily operational perspective, but when we put our trade compliance goggles on, we are looking at this from another perspective. We want to find the unique cases where things in some way or fashion compromise trade compliance. It could be changes to date on transaction documents, as Charlotta mentioned. It could be that the operations perform their activities in an order that impacts our trade compliance controls. It could be that systems are not in line from a configuration perspective. So we use very much the process mining tool to zoom in and analyze cases, and based on that, we draw our conclusions. And how do we do it? Well, this is an example that I brought. And it's a case where we can see that someone has changed the metadata in a transaction document. Without going into too much detail, what has changed is the country information. And on a general level, we can see on 2 pie diagrams, and then suddenly the pie diagram to the right looks a little bit different. So we immediately see that there is a change. Now, how do we capture this change? We have a bunch of criteria that we use to query the data and automatically notify us, and that provides us information and a link so that we can use that link and pull up this kind of graph immediately that we see in front of us. If we want to see in more detail, we can of course then look at the ordinary process flow where we can see where did this occur in the operation or in the operational activities. We can also see how often do we see that this kind of particular behavior appears in our business. And then if we want to really dig down into a single case, we can look at the details where we pull out all of the details that we have registered in our transaction systems that relate to a single case. So that is, in short, how we use process mining today. But as you can understand, we're not done. We have heard previously that we're moving into preventive analytics. When we do that, when we continue on that journey, there are some very key questions that we ask ourselves, very much related to what, where, and when. And we're looking at questions like what is likely to occur, when is it likely to occur, how much time before the point of no return, because in every flow, we will find that there is a point where we can't act to prevent it from happening. We can only control the damage. Where is it likely to occur? Where in the organization, geographically, in what company? At what stage in the process will it occur? And then, last but not least, since we are looking at business flows, how can we use the process mining tool capability to visualize the complete end-to-end flow, especially looking at object-centric process mining? So that is one path that we are following right now. The other one is, of course, looking at how we can make use of large language models, machine learning. And when we do that, we're looking very much on the how questions. And here are some examples. One of the major challenges that we have experienced in process mining in general is that conceptually, it's not difficult. I think we all recognize, and when we talk among ourselves, we think it's great. But we're all analytical people when we look at this, and we look at it from a certain perspective. But if we look at an organization, not everyone is wired in the same way. So they have difficulties to draw conclusions from what they see in the data. So we're very much looking at how LLM machine learning can lower those thresholds to open up the understanding and the use of analytics, where process mining obviously plays a part, among other tools that we have. And that brings us to the next question down there below. How can we create a contiguous analytics environment where we share the same data regardless of what tool we're using, if we're looking at QPR, as it were, or looking at it in Excel or Power BI or what other tool that we would use to visualize the data? How can we make it contiguous so that the users recognize the numbers and the figures that they see? As you saw, we're handling rather large amounts of volumes. Again, how can we use these very powerful tools to make our volumes of data and the amount of detail that we're handling understandable to human brains? Then, of course, we're not satisfied with the data that we have today. We would like to expand to other areas. And we see a great opportunity to use machine learning, large language models, to structure and prepare new data so that we can include it, but also to help us out to identify behavior or occurrences that would be of interest for us to monitor continuously and create criteria so that we could continuously monitor our transaction systems and be notified as soon as we see something that draws our attention.
So from an organizational perspective, we have a number of challenges. Classically, our type of organization is focused on details. We're looking at things in a single limited context, where nowadays we need to look at the big picture and the global perspective, which is obviously a challenge because people know what they know what they have been doing, they know what they are familiar with, and opening up and seeing the big picture, as Johan was saying earlier, is a challenge for many people. So it's a journey we're on to evolve that capability in the organization. We also need to move from a, call it a desktop warrior perspective, where we look at things that already happened and try to rectify things in retrospect, where we need to be out there in front. We need to be a lot more hands-on in the business flow, prepare for what may happen, provide the advice and the structure and the guidance that's required so that people do it right the first time and don't find out afterwards that something went wrong. Because usually when things go wrong, it's either complicated or it becomes a monetary issue or a legal issue, which is obviously something that we would like to avoid if we can at all do it.
So, from a IT point of view, we deliver these solutions through what we called IT services, or you can also call it products. And those products are then built up by different components. And all of these components, as well as all the IT services or products, are governed in the same way from a software point of view when it comes to onboarding, governance, and accesses, ensuring that we have all the security boundaries in place and all the enterprise architecture in place and so forth. So for this area, we have the trade compliance analytics as the IT service, and it's built upon a number of components. We have the data lake, where we have Snowflake, which we migrated through to last year. We have a case management part in it, where we can send notifications throughout in the organization when the tool identifies any anomaly or deviation or whatever we want to address, and we can handle that through proper case management. We have a BI part where we can use it for simpler dashboards and reporting. We have the AI part where we have machine learning components. We have different LLMs that we can use for different purposes, both for internal development as well as for solutions for the business use. And on top of everything, we have the process mining part, the QPR process mining, which is the main UI for the solution, where we do all the heavy lifting when it comes to analytics, both from a traditional point of view as well as the more forward-looking one that we are now entering into in this area. And we're also very proud of having actually a patent pending on this solution. Thank you.